and welcome to the Literacy-Based Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Ungerleiter, and thanks for joining me. I'd like to start off this podcast with a short introduction to tell you all a little bit more about myself and what I hope to accomplish with this podcast channel. In addition, I will inform you all on how this podcast will be formatted and structured. So let's begin. As I said, I'm Joseph Ungerleiter, and I'm a senior at James Madison University. I'm currently in the College of Education. In my last semester as an undergrad, I had the pleasure of taking a literacy-based learning class. In this class, I learned a lot about the importance of literacy and what role literacy plays in the classroom and in students' lives. I'm studying to be a high school history teacher, and this class helped develop my understanding of disciplinary literacy strategies in social studies, as well as across most all content areas. I want to use this podcast format to share with you all the knowledge, strategies, and personal reflection I gained from this literacy-based course. Each episode, I will focus my attention on a few essential questions surrounding my topic. These questions include: how does language and literacy function in different disciplinary fields? What types of literacy practices do young people engage with every day in their sociocultural settings? What is the role of literacy in young people's lives? What is the relationship between language use and identity? And finally, what is the role of linguistic diversity in secondary education? I will include outside research, course readings, and some strategies throughout the podcast in hopes to best educate you all, my audience. After each episode, or before, you could check out the sources I've used and the links I've included in the description below. Feel free to discover the content for yourself, and please feel free to leave a comment below with any additional thoughts and ideas. I hope you all enjoyed the channel and today's podcast. So, to begin the podcast, I wanted to focus on what is disciplinary literacy and what role does it play across multiple disciplines in secondary education, specifically social studies and science. So, according to Shanahan and Shanahan, disciplinary literacy has an emphasis on the knowledge and abilities possessed by those who create, communicate, and use knowledge within the disciplines. So disciplinary literacy focuses on certain reading strategies and tools for different disciplinary areas. For example, a student might approach a history text differently than they would a science text. While there are similar reading strategies and generic reading strategies that can be applied to all disciplines, most disciplines have a specific strategy and methods to approaching text that is unique to that discipline. So, for example, vocabulary, if you approach science vocabulary in a generic way and had students define, write down, organize, memorize vocabulary words, yes, they might remember the word, but it won't be sufficient in the learning of science vocabulary. On the contrary, as seen with disciplinary reading strategies, it might be better to approach science vocabulary words by observing their unique Greek and Latin roots. This would allow students to decode often the dense and precise meanings of science vocabulary. And hopefully they can then make connections with other concepts and meanings in science. So similar in history, the vocabulary can be disciplinary specific. Usually, history terms are less concise and focus more on interconnected groups and events. So for example, the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, they explain a large amount of time, but it's in one word. Or if you look at the Roaring '20s or the Gilded Age. So history is also, history students are faced with primary sources and understanding who the author is, and understanding who the author is a central construct to interpretation. So it's important also as students approach history texts to look at who the author is and what bias does he or she bring to the text. This is also getting to know what did he or she know and when did he or she know this. So a little different than how science teachers might approach empirical data and absolute truths and testing hypothesis. History students are usually focusing on primary sources and looking at history. So furthermore, disciplinary experts might approach a text differently than a novice or student might. What we need to do is to provide our students with tools and strategies that experts use to understand content. Students should not approach disciplinary literature in a generic way, but they should approach literature like an expert. Teachers should empower students and provide them the tools to be an investigator, to be an historian, a scientist, a mathematician. In Shanahan publications, they have come to the conclusion that as students examine varied disciplinary choices or relatively specialized patterns of language use, they may become better equipped to deal with the learning demands of that particular discipline. And I think as teachers, that's our number one goal, is to equip our students to deal with the learning demands of the particular discipline. And that's what I hope to do as a teacher, and I hope people watching this, prospective teachers, also try to do the same and empower their students through disciplinary literacy.